Instagram page. He said, it's so crazy that you all were talking about women and how they like to argue this morning because as of last night, I was ready to leave my girl because of it. She argues with me about everything. She's beautiful, she has a good heart, and the sex is good, but the arguing is just too much. And as of last night, I was just ready to give it all up. But now, after hearing about all of these women on the radio that like to argue, it seems like no matter who I'm with, I'm going to have to deal with a woman arguing with me. So now I want to know, should I love my girl and just stick with her because every woman's arguing, or every woman argues, or I can't take it anymore, should I just leave my girl alone because of it?
You looking over here at me now. I don't know why you looking at me because what? Are you asking me? Because if you're asking me, it sounds like he's the problem.
Oh, here we go.
Because the thing is, if you think every girl in the world is going to argue, and that is what you got from our conversation, it sounds like you're just not a good listener, and you're not going to ever be receptive to any woman. So you should probably be by yourself. Let her go so she can find somebody that appreciates her conversation.
Chicago. So this man loved this woman to stick with her because no matter what, he's going to deal with a woman who argues with him, or leave her because the argument is just too much. He can't.
Okay. So I didn't hear the conversation earlier that took place, but what homegirl just said was right on the money. Why? There are a lot of factors that go into arguing or disagreeing with someone. One of the main issues that I see a lot of the time is that whenever a woman expresses something that she is unsatisfied with, a man automatically thinks that she's trying to argue. We can have a discussion where we disagree on something without it being an argument. Let me tell you what takes something from a simple discussion to an argument. Overwhelm of emotion, so people's tone starts to go out. And then when we talk about the foundation of communication, something is getting misconstrued where somebody starts to get defensive, and then somebody shuts down, and then the other person is upset that they're shutting down, and so the conversation doesn't go anywhere. There's a concept that a lot of people don't know about, and I'll spend another video talking about this, which is called fair fighting. So just because you disagree on something doesn't mean that it always has to go up, up, up. If your discussions where you and somebody or your partner disagree on something and they always escalate, there's usually a pattern. So you need to break down what is the pattern that takes us from having a normal discussion to a full-blown argument. Because usually if it's somebody that you tend to bump heads with a lot, it's a cycle that happens. Somebody does something, somebody does something, somebody does something, somebody says something, and then it just escalates. And we've gone from having a civilized conversation about something to a full-blown argument. Now, it's inevitable that people are going to argue or have conflict or have confrontation. Like, that's the part of life. So for him to feel like, oh, well, I just need to find a woman that doesn't argue with me, that means finding a woman who does not have her own opinions. Pretty much, because you're not always going to agree with somebody. So depending on, like, I would need to know, like, what is it that you're constantly arguing about? Because some people do get in petty spots where they like to argue. And sometimes, like they said, I guess, like, women have admitted to this. And I've even had clients say that, like, they may start an argument on purpose, and the root of that, because now we have to talk about what the foundation or the intent behind that is. It can be different for different people. But most of the time, like my client said, well, I may be in a shitty space, in a bad space, and I want to bring somebody in that space with me so that they can validate my feelings. So sometimes people will start shit just so that they are not sitting alone in their own discomfort of emotion. And usually because those are negative and heavy emotions that we don't like to feel. So by bringing somebody else in on that, now I've engaged you, and now we can both have a shitty day. Or if somebody feels that you are responsible for making them feel bad, they may purposely go out of their way to make you feel bad. I know one thing I couldn't stand in a few of my relationships was, like, I couldn't have the autonomy to just be upset. If I was upset, then nigga, he had to be upset because I'm upset. And that was annoying because, again, like, we don't always, a part of being in a relationship and being two secure people in a relationship is your feelings aren't always contingent on your partner's, on the other person's feelings. So every time they up or every time they down, you don't need to be up or down. Like, you are entitled to feeling how you feel outside of them. And it doesn't always have to be a personal thing. Like, I could be upset, and because I don't want to engage or whatever, you're internalizing that and making it personal and being like, well, I did something, now I'm mad because you mad. That's not fair to people. Like, allow people to kind of be in their emotions without feeling like you need to get upset because they're upset because they feel like you did something. Now, at the end of the day, everybody is responsible for their own emotions, period. Like, somebody could have done something or done a behavior or whatever, an act that upset you. However, that emotion that sits with you, that is your responsibility to fix. If you are in a relationship, you do expect your partner to hear you out, to provide some understanding and some patience so that you all can reach a happy medium. But to say that, like, oh, every woman I get with, she want to argue, like, well, how often is the arguing? Because people are going to argue. Like, conflict is a part of life. And when you spend so much time trying to avoid topics because you think that it's going to elicit an argument, you don't give it a chance to be fixed. And when you don't, and when you do that, most of the time it comes out in being passive aggressive. Because now I'm sitting on something that I feel like you won't give me the space to talk about or to communicate in a proper way. And so now, because I still have to be around you, or I'm choosing to be around you, but I can't hide my emotion, it's going to come out in very snarky and petty ways. So that's something else that you don't want to happen. When you don't allow, especially women, when you don't allow women to communicate, they shut down or they get passive aggressive about it. And then that's when resentment builds. When somebody is passive aggressive or passive in general, that resentment starts to sit because they feel like they don't have the space to truly say how they feel without there being some type of backlash. And that's a big problem with a lot of our communication nowadays. We just don't give people the space to express themselves and feel how they feel without always taking it so personally. Now, it's different, and this is something else that, like, I talk to people about, and women, you have to be careful about this, is knowing who you're communicating with, so knowing your audience and how they're going to receive your message. So if you have something on your heart that you want to talk about and you express it in a passive aggressive way, the person is most likely going to feel that passive aggressiveness, and it's going to make them defensive and not even want to engage in the conversation. Another complaint I hear from men a lot of the time is, oh, wait, women, y'all just nagging. Women wouldn't nag. I ain't gonna speak for all women. Most women wouldn't nag if they felt heard. And if after they felt heard, behavior change. You can't say that I'm nagging you because I'm asking the same things of you that I've been asking for forever. And that's a sign to women. If you feel like you have to keep nagging a person, that means they aren't hearing you, or they don't care to hear you, or they don't care to change their behavior. So if you find yourself in a position where you're constantly feeling like you bugging somebody, it's not going to serve you, because pretty much what that represents is you just don't feel heard. You should be able to have a discussion with somebody about something, especially your partner, and tell them, this is the issue, this is what I would like to be done about the issue, and what type of compromise can we come to. If that discussion isn't happening, because again, this is a problem. People, instead of looking at a problem and being like, it's us versus the problem, y'all think it's me versus them. And that's not how it should be. It's the two of you all versus the issue. So if you can't sit down together and problem solve in a rational way, you need to look at the pattern in which your communication is happening, because something somewhere is going wrong where it doesn't have to. And the only time you're really capable of changing a fighting pattern or arguing pattern is to be intentional about it and to be aware of it. You can't continue to say, well, I don't know why our fights always get this way, but you're not sitting down and you're not breaking down the logistics of how that shit happens. and deciding that in those moments you're gonna do something different.
Rotanya's on the line from Rogers Park. Said this man love to leave this argumentative woman alone.
I think he should love her because I mean, us females, we do argue. I myself does it with my boyfriend every day, literally.
You sound like
you
it.
do.
I mean, it's all out of love, though.
You
It's all out of
sound
love.
like it.
You sound like it might be your boyfriend at the end.
And another issue that she just made me think of is the fact that, like, in a relationship, you have to learn to pick and choose your battles. Women just as much. Like, everything doesn't have to be a fight. It doesn't. So if this is something that you can find yourself being able to let go, don't feel the need to pick at it. Because, again, when you start to pick at something, then you've just created it and made it into a bigger problem than it has to be. So everything that you see or whatever, it just doesn't have to go there. You know what I mean? So you have to learn how to pick and choose, like, what's worth fighting over. Because if you find that every little thing, you left the toilet seat up, you did this, you did that, you did that, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. Now, I'm not saying you don't tell a person once and then, you know, you expect to see some type of change, and then when it don't, that's when the nagging happens. But to be put in a position where you're constantly having to talk to somebody about the same exact thing repeatedly, that's exhausting. You should be exhausted from that. So I would consider, again, if it's somebody you really care about, we need to discover what the root of our disagreement patterns are. Because if we don't, then it will ruin you, and it will feel like every single time something comes up, you all can't have a civil conversation. I know me, I'm at a place where I got so much peace, I don't have time to be being upset, and arguing takes a lot of energy out of you. It really does. It takes a lot of emotional energy, and mental energy, and it's just not a good space. It gives me a lot of anxiety. I don't like not having, like, being in that good place with the person that I'm fucking with. So yeah, you have to pick and choose. And that's not to say, like, oh, I'm gonna be passive. No, there's a difference between being passive and being assertive, and knowing, like, okay, this is something that's truly gonna bother me versus something that I'm not gonna even think about tomorrow. And again, this is not to be confused with somebody who is just problematic. Like, they have a problem with every single thing that you do, and that can bring up some negative feelings, being unappreciated, or just a lot of negative emotions can come up when you constantly feel like somebody is always accusing you or blaming you. And that takes me to my next point, is there's a way to have a conversation with somebody and not make them feel attacked or blamed. Because when you come out the gate attacking and blaming somebody, they're gonna shut down, they're gonna get defensive, they're gonna shut down, they're not gonna hear you, they're not gonna be open to the conversation. So something that we teach clients is to use I feel statements, where you say I feel, you express an emotion that you feel, and then you describe the behavior attached to whatever caused the feeling, and then you suggest a solution. So that way you are taking ownership of your feelings, you are explaining that they did a behavior, you are giving a solution without going into it being like, well, you always do this, and you always make me feel this way, and you always hurt me, and you don't ever think about me. Ladies, I'm telling you, to men, you gotta learn how to communicate with them so that they hear you. Because if you always come out the gate swinging, you're never gonna get anywhere. And then what happens is people never get anywhere, and then they put a band-aid over it, and then it comes back up later on. So when I talk about a band-aid, I mean makeup, sex, what else we want to talk about? Gifts. But these things come with no resolution, because y'all have blown up, everybody is separated, and then somebody come in like, you hungry? That's a band-aid. That's not dealing with whatever is really going on. And I'm telling you now, all it's gonna do is come back up later. It's just gonna resurface, and then you still gonna have to deal with it. And you're gonna sit there and you're gonna feel like you arguing over the same things all the time, because you've never reached a resolution. You've never come to a compromise on some shit. So yeah, it's gonna feel like that. And for men, you have to give your lady the space to feel like she can talk to you about anything. Because if you don't, again, that's when the passive aggressiveness comes out. That's when the pettiness comes out. Because what that represents is the fact that she does not feel like she can be vulnerable to you. A lot of times, the feeling underneath, because of course, like I told y'all before, people go towards anger and frustration first because those are like the close and the easy emotions. But underneath, there's usually a lot of hurt. And women who have on a hard protective shell, or women who feel like they cannot be vulnerable with you, they not gonna come out the gate and say they hurt. They gonna come out pissed off with an attitude, all this other stuff. And that's really the feeling underneath. So ladies, if you are with a man who you feel like you cannot openly communicate with, you cannot be vulnerable with and say, look, I'm hurting, it's not healthy. It's not healthy at all, because again, all it does is it just piles on different emotions. And then that's how, when you think something is, y'all dealt with something, and then you have an argument later on and the shit just come right back up, it's because y'all not dealing with it. And another negative consequence to not giving your partner the space to discuss things with you is then they go outside the relationship and they start discussing the shit with other people. I know men hate, like, why y'all always got to go tell y'all friends shit? When people don't feel heard, they're going to go tell it to somebody else. So if you don't want everybody in your business, I think it's probably smart for you to give your partner the space to express themselves and to share what's on their mind, even if it's something that you don't like. Because we're not going to like everything that somebody says. That's to think that is naive, to be naive. So if you don't want her going and telling her friend, her mama, her auntie, or anybody else that will listen because you won't, you need to give her the space to say what she means, and not constantly putting it off. Oh, we'll talk later, because all that's gonna do is make her anxiety rise, give her more shit to put in the tank to bring up later. Like, just plan to have the discussion so she can be at ease, you can be at ease, you all can come to a happy medium. Because if you don't, everybody gonna know your business because she ain't got nobody else to talk to. So you know what I'm adding to my services? Couples mediator. You and your partner, y'all always getting into it. You want to have somebody who is objective, who is a professional, to hear out a disagreement that you all repeatedly have or keep having, or something that comes up, and you want somebody to help you rationally work through it. I'm your girl, okay? Because that's what it sounds like. It sounds like y'all need somebody in the middle to, let's break this down before it gets up here. This is how they feel. This is how they feel. How can we reach a nice little middle ground? Sound like a plan to me. I think that's all I got on this subject, because I'm going to do a whole nother video on just communication and fighting fair. This just kind of was able to give me a nice little introduction into that, because this is a major problem, a big problem. It's the reason why so many people are walking around with just negative attitudes, because they just don't feel heard, or they have shit going on underneath that they can't talk about or feel like they can't talk about, and it's coming up in all areas of life, and it's making their interactions with other people negative, essentially. So yeah, I think that's all I got. Y'all enjoy the rest of your day.